While Mickey Banks and Paul Britton made a television appeal for information about Sam and Jasmine's murders. In an unusual move, Paul Britton appealed directly to the killer to contact him.
I would also like him to tell me why it was necessary for him to harm the child as well.
When you say you'd like him to tell you, I mean, he's not really likely to ring out and say, "Could I speak to Paul Britton, please?" And here are his answers. Or is he?
I think that there is a possibility that he might want to do that.
But the killer didn't call. During the early days of the investigation, Mickey Banks was not only exploring links with the Green Chain rapes, he linked up with the Rachel Nickell team at the Met.
We had a meeting. There was no way that you could persuade either Keith Pedder or Mick Wickerson, the person in charge of that inquiry, that anybody but Stagg had done their murder. There was a total blank on it. They had other evidence I wasn't privy to, but they, you know, Paul Britton was convinced that Stagg was their murderer.
But Paul Britton says he did link Rachel Nickell's murder with the murders of Sam and Jasmine Bissett. He says it was the Rachel Nickell team who were fixed on Stagg.
My view was that, of course, these are linked. Look, the view that was given to me was that if I felt that my experience in these matters, my investigatory expertise, I think the phrase was superior to that of the Metropolitan Police with its vast experience in these matters, and I took a view that was contrary to their crime analysts, then it would be arrogant of me, and that they simply weren't linked. It was as simple as that. And I had to accept that.
But there is a problem here, because in your book, you pick out the differences in the Samantha Bissett and the Rachel Nickell killings. You're very clear that you spend a page or 2 pages outlining the differences in the two killings. Yes. So why do you say you're linking them so closely now?
Because what I offer in the book is exactly the police analysis, and I have adopted that at that stage. The police have said that...
So you've been persuaded by the police?
Well, instructed, persuaded, yes, absolutely.
Meanwhile, back at the Samantha and Jasmine Bissett murder investigation, Mickey Banks was about to get the breakthrough he desperately needed. They had been able to recover a fingerprint from Samantha's flat that they were convinced belonged to the killer. And when they checked their system, they found a possible match: Robert Napper.
Napper, a couple of years before, had been arrested where he had some headed notepaper with Scotland Yard heading on it. And he'd gone into a shop trying to get some photostats made up of this headed notepaper. He purported on his verbal conversation he had with the chap in the shop to be a police officer. And the chap became very suspicious, contacted the police station, I think it was at Woolwich at the time, or Plumstead, and Napper was subsequently arrested and charged with impersonating a police officer. So consequently his fingerprints were on file. So because of that and the fingerprint that was found, there was only a hint that it could be him, but it could be one of many, many people. But then we researched him, found out that he lived in the area. We then found out about his connection with the rapes, the fact that he twice failed to appear for a blood sample.
Napper was arrested and taken in for questioning by a member of Mickey Banks's team. Banks and Paul Britton watched the interview via video link in another room at the station.
My impression of watching the interview that took place was that he was bomb-proof. He just didn't seem to be of this world to me. He was somebody that thought he was above all of it. A very strange, deep individual. You know, there's just something wrong with him. You could feel it by talking to him and seeing him. There was something missing.
In May 1994, Mickey Banks charged Robert Napper with the murders of Samantha and Jasmine Bissett. Napper was later charged with 2 rapes and 2 attempted rapes following the attacks on the Green Chain Walk. While Robert Napper was remanded in custody, Colin Stagg was about to be released. In September 1994, the case against him was thrown out after the judge deemed the honey trap evidence inadmissible.
My life has been ruined by a mixture of half-baked psychological theories and some stories written to satisfy the strange sexual requests of an undercover police officer. The judge recognised that there was never any evidence against me, no forensic evidence, no confession evidence, nothing at all.
I was there when the judge reviewed the evidence and absolutely castigated the prosecuting authorities, and it was the most appalling event, I think, for the police. I don't think the police even, or the Crown Prosecution Service, anticipated the ferocity of the judge's criticisms. He absolutely tore them apart and said to them essentially, you know, it's a disgrace that you've brought this case. There's not a shred of evidence here. I'm not even going to contemplate putting it before a jury. You know, it's a waste of time. How on earth did the police get into such a fiasco around this? You know, not only have they apparently pursued an entirely innocent man, but in doing so, they've wasted all this valuable time that could have been used finding out who really murdered Rachel Nickell.
Rachel's partner, Andre Hanscom, was at home in France with his son Alex when he heard the news.
I was taken by complete surprise when the phone rang, and I was told that it had been kicked out and that Colin Stagg was walked free.
But you, like the police and like many other people, were still convinced that Colin Stagg was the guilty man and he was now free.
I think we've been conditioned psychologically from the very beginning by the idea that whoever killed Rachel was of a certain description, and that description had been provided by eyewitness adult witnesses and had then been corroborated by a 3-year-old child who could not have been led in any way whatsoever. And the argument was that if it was not this person, it had to be someone who was a complete identical twin, and that was just impossible. So the very fact that Stagg had been identified there was enough on top of those things to close you in to a box in which it was impossible to think that could have been any other possibility.
Rachel's father also found it difficult to come to terms with the court's decision.
The law has been upheld, but where is the justice? I understand that the police will now keep the files on my daughter's murder open, but they are not looking for anyone else.
Colin Stagg, as far as the police were concerned, was still the man who got away with murder.
I can tell you at first hand that many police officers were saying, well, Colin Stagg's a lucky boy, he's got away with it. You know, we've tied ourselves in knots here, and it's benefited him, but really and truthfully, there isn't anybody else. And I know that Colin Stagg was kept under constant surveillance for probably at least a year after that event.
Back in 1994, it seemed Rachel Nickell's killer would never be identified. It would take a DNA breakthrough more than a decade later to finally bring her killer to justice. In 1995, the loner police thought had killed Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common was a free man. But Rachel's real killer was about to be sentenced for 2 separate murders and a series of attacks on women.
A serial sex attacker was sent to Broadmoor indefinitely today for killing a young woman and her 4-year-old daughter. He admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
For some, the root of Napper's offending lies in his troubled childhood in Plumstead, southeast London. Bill Peake was a classmate of the young Robert Napper.
Robert was a very quiet lad, very shy lad, a bit of a loner really. He never really fitted into any of our social groups. He was very much on his own during his school years. It wasn't a school where there was particular levels of bullying, but where there was bullying, Robert was often the target of that bullying. And that bullying could be both from sort of the boys and the girls, really. So, yeah, he was a very vulnerable, very shy young lad, really.
We know that Napper was taken to a psychiatrist when he was very young, and he reported to his father that the psychiatrist said, "I'm mad, Dad," and found it quite amusing. That, alongside another feature that is common in these sorts of very violent men, is that at an early age, and certainly pre-puberty, they've been assaulted by someone that's very close to them. And in Napper's case, we don't know who it was, but there are some indications that this person was someone that he trusted.
It seemed that Robert Napper had got away with Rachel's murder, but a revolution in DNA